In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. One of the things that I wish that would tell anybody who is going to be ordained or who is thinking about getting into the ordained life is the effect and change that wearing a daily uniform is going to have on you. One of the things that you'll see is that when you walk around with a clerical collar or the black shirt or whatever you're wearing, people are going to look at you differently. But there's also another aspect to it. When you're wearing that, you better be on your best behavior. Because there are certain things you cannot say or do. I mean, you shouldn't say or do them anyway. But you really shouldn't say or do them because you will cause scandal to the church, you will cause scandal to your fellow clergy, and of course you will hurt fellow Christians who, they need to look to you as a good example. The thing that always makes me laugh is when I'm out and about and I'm wearing my clericals, and at lunch I'll sometimes take out the white tab and put it to the side. I stopped doing that because I would go to a restaurant and people would think I was a waiter. There's nothing like sitting in Olive Garden dressed in all black, and when you go up to go to the restroom, somebody says, "When you have a moment, could I please have some more breadsticks?" To which I said, of course, and got them some, But there's another side of that too, because there are moments when we don't want to have that burden, when we don't want to be that example. And those are the moments when we need to be that example the most. To me, one of the most shameful examples of this for myself occurred a few years ago, where at my previous parish there's a kind of a 4-lane road. It's a big road that cuts there, and the only way to really get to where you need to go is you've got to pull out and make this U-turn at a light and go the other way. And waiting at the light to make my turn was a homeless man, and he had that sign made of cardboard and Sharpie, and it said, "Hungry, please help." And I'd had a pretty long day. It was towards the end of the day of work, and no excuse, I just said to myself, "Please let this light turn green." Because I didn't want to interact with this person. I had dealt with so many people in need in the past week, and I just didn't want to in this moment. But then he kind of got closer and closer. I was about 4 cars back, and he got closer and closer. And then I kind of did what some of us might do in that situation. We kind of lowered ourselves in our seat, and I reached in and I took the white tab out and I put it right here on the seat. The light turned green. I made my U-turn, and as I was driving down the street, I was instantly hit with shame. How dare I? I wear that to be a sign of somebody who's taken a vow for myself and to lead others to care for the poor. And what had I done but pretended to not care and to still be self-righteous person to not be caught doing it? So needless to say, God and I had a few words on the way home, I think with him doing a lot of the talking. Why do I bring that up? Because there's a line in today's gospel reading that if we're not careful, it's going to get lost. See, this is a very important moment in the last week that Jesus is ever going to live on earth before his death and his resurrection. He's with his friends in Bethany, which is not even 2 miles from Jerusalem, so he's almost to Jerusalem to start Holy Week. And as he's there, he's with Mary and Martha and Lazarus and his disciples, and they're having a dinner in his honor. And here comes Mary, who breaks open this wonderful smelling perfume, the most precious thing that she has in the world, and she anoints his feet and then uses her own hair to dry it off. And the reason she does that is out of complete and utter devotion and love. She truly loves Jesus for who he is and what he's done. And that's a wonderful way for her to show that. But then, of course, Judas chimes in. And I love that in the Gospels they have to put those parentheses because there's no parentheses in the Greek. Where it says, could not this have been sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor? Not a bad statement. But Judas doesn't say that because he cares about the poor. He cares about it because it's money that he steals. And Jesus' response is what I want to talk about today. Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. You always have the poor with you. Now we hear that and we say to ourselves, yeah, there's a lot of poor people around. Walk around St. Petersburg. There's a lot of poor people around. They're always going to be here, so just kind of accept it and move on. That's not what Jesus was saying. Jesus was quoting Deuteronomy. So in the 15th chapter of Deuteronomy, verses 7 through 11, this is what the people in the room would have thought back to because they read their Torah. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. For the poor you will always have with you in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy and to the poor in your land. So now with a little bit of context, we get an idea that God has said this to his people with the understanding of, look at what's been given to you. The land, the richness of the land, and everything that's been given to you. Don't forget about those who will be in need. And one of the things that's kind of not said but implicit is that the reason there's always need, the reason there's always the poor, is because we live in a sinful and fallen world. Before the fall of humankind, there was no poor. Everybody had what they needed. But humanity sins, and now this imbalance in the world enters, and people become stubborn and say, this is mine, I don't have to share. It's like the old saying, everything I learned of value I learned in kindergarten, and one of the big things they say is what? Share. Right? Maybe the church needs to go back to kindergarten. I don't know. And so when Jesus says this, he's saying it on two levels. The first level he's saying it is, look at what true poverty looks like. Recognize poverty in the world, which is those who don't have anything. But there's another dynamic here. Jesus chose poverty. He could have chosen to come to us in any way in which he wanted. He could have been the richest person in the world, in the entire world. And that's not what he chose. He chooses instead to not only identify with, but to spend the majority of his time with people who have nothing. With people who can give him nothing in return for his love. And so when he identifies with them, and people criticize him for it, he really answers back with some of the parables and the sayings that we've seen in the last few weeks. But it goes even deeper. Because if poverty means that we lack something, that we're without something like money or riches or something, Jesus is the poorest of all. Because he will give his life. The poorest person is the one who does not even have their own life. And so Jesus chooses that poverty. But I think he also says it for another reason. It's a reminder to the disciples who've been told about the kingdom of heaven that the work is not done. It is just beginning. Jesus says this as an indictment upon all of humanity that poverty still exists because we have failed. So the question is, what do we do about it? What do we do about the back-breaking poverty in our world? What do we do about the crushing poverty in our own community? What do we do about the heinous reality that the greatest population of poverty in our nation is children? Children who may eat one meal a day because they go to a public school. And that's it. It exists. It is out there. Now, I'm not here to say that there's a particular policy or strategy or something that we should do in order to end poverty across the world. I don't have that one. It's not in my pocket. But I know what we can't do. And there's a really good example of what we can't do aside from what I did at the beginning of the sermon, which is hope that it just goes away. In the 2016 Olympics, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil had a really interesting strategy for how to deal with poverty, because when you land at the airport and then you drive from the airport to where the Olympic Games are going to be held, where the nice hotels are and all the wonderful shops and things to see, you're going to pass these really bad residences and shanty towns. You know, like favelas is what they're called. And so they came up with an easy solution to deal with this. When you drive along from the airport to the place where you're going, they just build really big walls, so you don't have to see them. And so what happens to humanity oftentimes is out of sight, out of mind. It was an easy way to address the poverty. Just ignore it. This is the exact opposite of what Jesus did. If you notice, if you go back into the Gospels, when Jesus encounters the poor, be they the poor in spirit or the poor in food or the poor in money, he is moved to compassion. But that's a weak translation of the Greek word, which I can't pronounce, so don't worry. It's a really poor translation of the word. So to understand the word, I want you to take your hand and I want you to put it right here, just below your stomach. Right here. Okay. Now, how many people here have ever had that really bad feeling when you've overeaten? Yeah, we're Americans. We're good at that. Okay. How many people here have ever had that really bad feeling when you ate something that you shouldn't have? You know? And you just say to yourself, Lord, if you get me out of this pain, oh, the things I will do for you. Right? It is from that place that Jesus felt compassion. It was a visceral reaction that he had to look at people and see their suffering, and it hurt him. It affected and turned his insides out. And that's the question for us. When we see poverty, when we see the person who's hurt, in need, poor in spirit, do we have that reaction? Or have we become desensitized? It's easy to become desensitized. If somebody tells you, well, there's poor people over here, there's poor people over there, someone needs food, just wait till tomorrow. The same problems will be back again. But what Jesus wants us to remember is that the moment we stop having that reaction, that gut feeling of pain for that person, is the beginning of deciding we can't do anything to help them. So this is not me telling anybody in the church, this is the specific strategy that you should use, give someone this or give someone that. Each person has to discern that on their own as part of the community. But the question should be, during these last 2 weeks of Lent, have I lost that reaction to suffering? The closest I came to having that reaction aside from a poor person was when I was doing my time as a hospital chaplain student, and there was a person who came in who was in such poor shape that the only way that I can describe it is that the human body was meant to contain things on the inside. And for some reason, this person's body had decided that those things needed to be on the outside. Okay? And the reaction that I had to that was so visceral right here, I had to leave the room for a minute. Because I couldn't stand to see that type of suffering and pain on another person's face. But I had to go back in. I had to hold that person's hand and talk to them and try to comfort them in some small way. Because I couldn't save their life, I'm not a doctor. But I prayed with them. So in these last 2 weeks of Lent, the challenge that I want to give to us before it is over is to ask, where is that reaction in me? Do I still have it? And if I don't have it, But I want you to pay close attention to the reading of the Passion that's going to take place on Palm Sunday. That's when we'll see Jesus' poverty face to face. And we'll realize what it means to lose one's life in true poverty. And then we'll actually have that reaction for him. To which I'm sure he would reply, "No, go and have that reaction for others." So today, as we come together and begin this time of winding down our Lent, my prayer is that each one of us will feel that for our fellow human beings and not turn away, not look away, not pull the tabs out of our collars, but instead look that person in the eye and with dignity and love and say, "I don't know how, but let's find a way to help you." Amen.